Good afternoon. Hello again. Okay. We wanted to do this session in order to really go into more practical aspects of what all of you are doing and try to share some important and good practice that is emerging and leave it open to discussion and what you take away from this. So what you heard people say on the stage is now in practical action in terms of examples. We do have a small set of presenters over here who will just take some time, around 20-ish minutes, to frame all the important aspects of transition planning and finance in banks. We will not be able to go round the table with introduction of everybody since we are a bit conscious of time. But when you speak, please do tell us, which institution you are from. So if we can start now, um, can we put it on full view? So, first of all, thank you. We have come together with actually two very good banks who are doing a lot of interesting work, irrespective of when the regulation will come or, on what will it say. And I think that's the message that I give and I take from the discussions earlier. We have Ria Saxena from RMI. RMI is also doing a lot of work in producing tools which will be helpful for your practical, assessments, etc. We have Ankit from Step Change. I think a whole lot of you would already know him. And when it comes to financed emissions, we can say it's equal to Ankit. So that's what we have in the room. We have a very fine economist, Suranjali Tandon. She is from NIPFP, and we have been working together, in fact, on quantifying some of the work, some of quantifying banking sector exposure to high carbon. So can we, if we just move to the next slide, uh, I have already taken more than my 2 minutes, but I will quickly say that move to the next slide. What we are focusing on is we can't get this bigger, right? Or can we? Okay, fine. It is like this. Okay. Okay, I'll try to see the. Okay. So basically, what do you expect when you are beginning to or in the process of creating transition plan? Now, there is a difference between transition planning and plan. It is a simple difference. Plan is a disclosed document. Planning is the process within the banks. What we want to do over here is what is the way to assess whether your transition planning is holistic and robust. What we will look into is approaches that banks are taking, some solutions that they are thinking and they're finding to be very productive. And we will just very briefly look at some tools and frameworks that you can use. So with that, I think I would first give it to Suranjali, who will tell us about some of the findings that are coming out of the research that we are doing.
Thanks, Neha. I'm going to jump right into the results that we have. And sorry about the font, it's very small. So the work that we wanted to do is to basically map out what the situation with the banking sector looks like today in terms of sectors that are hard to abate and what's the level of exposure of banks. Coffee, yeah. I don't think I have to preach to the room that banking sector is an important source of debt for corporates in India. If you look at the large corporates, it's about 30% of total borrowing. What we've seen is that from our statistics, which is compiled from RBI, is that there are sectors which are hard to abate, and some of these we include are transport, cement, steel, power, of course. And what we've seen is that while there has been, about a tenth of the total loans given by banks going to these sectors, what is promising in the numbers is that the exposure to the sectors has come down over time. And I think this is the question to the room as well in terms of what kind of strategies and thinking that banks are following in order to reduce this kind of exposure that we're seeing. But I think when we talk about banks, it's also important to acknowledge the importance of NBFCs, as RBI has repeatedly done, because there exists an interlinkage between the balance sheets of the two. NBFCs are large borrowers from banks, and what we found missing is that NBFCs don't report similar information as banks do on sector exposure, and I think that's an important piece because when there is a risk that transpires in the NBFC system, it will necessarily flow back to the banking system. So that's a question that we're raising in terms of how do we measure this, what kind of reporting would be required. I think another opportunity that we recognize from our numbers is that over the last few years, there's been a shorter end of the borrowing going up in terms of corporates and sectors borrowing from banks. The average tenor of borrowing has been less than 10 years. Now, what this means, and I could be wrong, so it would be great to hear from the banks. What I interpret this number is as if transition sort of kicks in, the portfolios can be managed faster in terms of shifting away from how to build sectors and minimizing or mitigating the risks that we see today. Next slide, please. Um, Again, awfully sorry about this chart, but what this basically does is that we have got through banks fund based exposure, and what we've seen is that so that one particular line that stands out as UCO Bank, which seems to have more than what we see as an average of exposure to conventional electricity, which is the yellow part of the bar. But what you see is that there are large systemic banks like HDFC and SBI, which have about 10% of fund-based exposure to sectors that are high emission. And that raises the question that when this sits within specific banks, how are these banks thinking about managing transition risks and what are their goals and their strategies? Um, Beyond just what we see the bank level, there's also corporate level interlinkages with the corporate. So what we've also done in our paper is to look at who are these entities that are borrowing from the market, the banks as well as corporate debt issuances, and we see that the usual suspects are large companies in the steel and power sector. And from there, we build on to the next piece of work, which we are still sort of fine tuning, but it has raised some very interesting questions, and I think Ria will talk about some of this, which is that you have companies laying out either an investment strategy or a net zero plan or a net zero strategy, and they look very different across different kinds of corporates, even within the sector. So the level of preparedness would be very different. The reliance on their specific kind of technologies like CCUS and hydrogen seems quite important in the plan. Now, what do banks take away from this is to say that there are companies which are laying out plans, there are companies that are laying out investment strategies, they're identifying technologies that they'd like to use as part of their transition. Um, the questions to be raised are how practical are these? Also, what is very interesting is many of these large corporates are planning ahead of what India has set as its 2017 net zero target. But how practical is it to achieve these targets? And of course, it's not just about the large corporates, it's also about the smaller corporations, which would also need to transition. So it's not as if banks can be happy, go home, that large corporates are doing this much sooner. But of course, from this analysis, raise questions on how do you assess when a corporate says that it's going to transition, and how do you tie it in with your own bank's internal mandate and the end date on net zero. So I'll stop there and hand it back.
So, Ranshini, I will not take much time because I think these things will come when, Deepak presents how they are looking at things. But generally, the challenge comes that, okay, if India has 2070 targets, bank, say a global bank has forward targets, some of their clients could have advanced targets. How do you reconcile all of this? My very instinctive and answer to that is a simple answer. Whatever is higher and better, go ahead. You will face difficulties or challenges on the way, but that is to be then solved and solved for in dialogue with your counterparty. So you don't have to wait until 2070 on those measures. Whatever is higher, better, sooner will give you a picture on how to adapt your portfolios and your strategies to move fast when you have to. I will quickly give it to Ankit now. I think this is your, yeah.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. To add, no, okay. We actually added all the scope 1, scope 2 emissions reported by top 1,000 companies, BRSRs around. And we noticed that that was only about 40% of India's emissions. So while top 1,000 do have concentrated emissions and they are responsible for a lot of hard to abate sectors, majority of emissions are still sitting in their value chains with SMEs, with consumers. So it is important to look at that piece of the puzzle as well as you start thinking about financed emissions or portfolio emissions more broadly. So coming quickly to financed emissions is, I hope everyone here is aware of what financed emissions are. It's essentially the emissions that you are responsible for as a financial institute because of the lending or investment activities that you do. So this is about, usually the way it's measured is you look at the emissions of the underlying entity that you lend to. It could be a corporate, an SME, an individual, a vehicle. There are 7 asset classes that are typically looked at. And how much of that can be attributed back to you? For simplicity, debt and equity are considered equal when it comes to the PCAF standard. So if you given 100 crores of debt to a company that's worth 1,000 crores across equity and debt, 10% of their emissions become your emissions. That's fairly simple. PCAF is the global standard for measuring financed emissions. There are 7 asset classes they look at: listed equity, corporate bonds, business loans or unlisted equity, project finance, commercial real estate and mortgages, which are similar, motor vehicles, and sovereign debt. There are some important categories that are not here. Agriculture, for example, is not here. Personal loans are not here. Credit cards are not here. There are several categories that are not here, which you, of course, as a financial institution can take steps towards measuring, but there isn't necessarily a common agreed way of doing that. So with moving to the next one, the way to go about doing this, and we all talk about data being a big challenge in this space. So what PCAF has done as a standard is it's given you multiple approaches to any of these categories. So if you don't have high quality data, you can go with score 5. The estimates on score 5 can be quite variable. Right? So you only use them as directional input on where most of your emissions are sitting at a category level, not really as high quality estimate. So you essentially the way score 5 happens is I've lent, let's say, 200 crores to a company. That 200 crores will generate 300 crores of economic activity using what is called the asset turnover ratio, and that 300 crores will generate so much emission. Right? So you're building emission estimates on top of estimates, and hence the overall quality of that answer is going to be lower. You can go higher by going to score 4. You can go further higher by going to score 3, which uses production data. Score 2 involves you collecting data from the companies that you're lending to. And score 1 typically depends on audited emissions being or assured emissions coming from the underlying entity, which are increasingly going to be available for top 1,000 listed companies. So there are different approaches to doing it for all asset classes. And for vehicles, there's a different approach. For mortgages, there's a different approach. But we've not come across a financial institution where we are not able to get to, on average, a score 4, score 3, given how much high quality data is increasingly available in the market. So if you've not started your journey on financed emissions, I would say it's a good time to start that journey because there's a lot of good data, good estimates that are starting to become available for the Indian economy. Going to the final slide that I had, this one, please. One thing that financed emissions plays a role in, apart from understanding your own footprint as a financial institution, is how this feeds into transition risk. So the way to think about transition risk, I know this slide is not really easily legible. So it's essentially a function of four things. First of all, a mix of policy, technology, and market dynamics, which is to say, how quickly are we transitioning as an economy? Right? So that's the first thing we have to understand. And that is usually captured as a scenario. Right? So what scenario are we in? Now, NGFS, IPCC have different scenarios that you can pick up. But I would also recommend thinking about what scenario do you believe in as a financial institution and try and think about or build your own scenarios, because certain global scenarios can only capture so much. The second is your carbon exposure. A lot of you would know carbon exposure for scope 1, scope 2 of your portfolio companies, but you also have to think scope 3, especially in context of transition risk, because when you think about something like carbon taxation, etc., the value chain of your portfolio company will also play a role in those carbon taxes flowing down. Right? So, for example, the steel industry might get taxed on their carbon content, but automotive will feel it because 10, 20, 30% of that comes of that cost of the vehicle is coming from steel. So essentially, knowing the carbon exposure of your portfolio companies across scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 is relevant, especially upstream scope 3. You don't really have to think about downstream scope 3. Cost of carbon. Now, cost of carbon has to be thought about not just as a specific tax that is put, but a more generalized cost of carbon in the economy. Now, because there will be different costs in some ways. For exporters to Europe, there will be a certain cost that's implemented to CBAM, but Indian economy will have its own carbon cost and so on. So you have to think through what the right carbon cost to pick is. And finally, and very importantly, climate ambition. The idea is to understand how the portfolio company that you're lending to is transitioning. Right? And how do you really start to bring that into your transition risk calculation? So these are the four important parameters to capture. The first three can often be captured outside in by reading up about what the company is doing. The fourth one, given people don't talk in detail about their transition plans, often involve a deep engagement with the company. There are four main transition channels for transition risk. There's the direct carbon cost, which is the scope 1, scope 2 of the scope 1, scope 2 carbon emissions of the company. Indirect carbon cost, that's the scope 3 the company. Transition expenditure. So transition expenditure is they're actually moving quickly on transition. They will be spending a lot on transition expenditure. So in those cases, their carbon cost, direct and indirect, will start coming down, but their transition expenditure goes up. Right? So it's also a balance. And revenue impact. You might be in certain businesses which are irrespective of whether you're transitioning or not, you're going to see certain revenue impact. So those four are essentially transmission channels that then feeds into your overall transition risk rating. I would still say that this is a relatively high level outside in assessment. This gives you a directional sense of which company is doing better, which company is not doing better. But a lot of estimates here are at a sector level. For you to really do transition risk well, you have to engage customer by customer, which you can do for your larger customers for hard to abate sector. But for certain smaller customers, SMEs, you might have to find more approaches like this, which at least give you a directional sense of where the risk sits. So with that, I'll pause, but then back.
Thank you so much, Ankit. We will, unless somebody has a burning question right now, we will try to proceed with the presentation so that you can also collect your question. Is that all right with everybody?
Yes.
Okay, sure. Please go ahead.
If I have to questions for renewable energy, because I'm financing. So I think the upstream manufacturing of the panels or the WCG. So typically, what is the percentage that you get associated for the upstream part of it in renewable energy? Says in solar.
Yeah, in renewable, almost 100% would be upstream, right? Because your scope 1, scope 2 would be zero.
Yeah, that is zero.
Yeah.
But how much of it would be like compared to how much I abate? The upstream would involve actually generating emissions. So
yes, that I'll have to come back to you. I don't have the numbers offhand. So your question is, if let's say I'm saving X units per kilowatt hour or X emissions,
how much would I lose?
How much of that is actually? See, it will come down to assumptions you make about the life of the panel and where the panel came from, etc. But it can be done.
Yeah, so domestic and non-domestic, it's almost, you can take an average. And internationally, it's all China, 90% is China. Do you have any?
I can check with my team by the end of this session.
No, that's okay. We can connect it. Fine.
Thank you for that question. May I now request Deepak to take us to the next?
Yes. Next slide. So
This is the really poor sort of screen presence of our slides, but we remember what we have introduced.
yes,
So,
at least I remember what
You have-
what I have written.
Exactly.
So in fact, the next slide is more crowded as compared to this.
So you presume that we are not seeing the slides.
Yes, I will presume that, and then I will try to explain. Okay, so let me start with this. So the kind of work which we did is currently not linked to decision making process, but what we are trying to achieve is that at least it will give us some strategic view, some sort of direction in which we can think, and then we can link with that. So with that view, we started this work. So although there is no regulatory compulsion as of now, but we thought that this is a good time we need to start. And these are the things which take time to develop. It's not something overnight key you do some system level changes and you are ready with the numbers. So so this will take time, and I would request you, everyone who have not yet started doing some work on this, so please go back and start doing at least some work on this. So the basic of this work starts from the moment you are ready with your final dimension computation. So that's the basic building block. So once you have that in your hand, so then you know that which are the sectors to which you have lent, and where your majority of emissions are coming from. Okay, there can be certain issues with data, but at least directionally you will be sure that where you have to work. So for example, in our case, from top 7 sectors, we were getting about 65-70% of the emissions. So we knew that we have to work for those sectors. So once we are ready with the emission numbers in hand, so then the next step is that we have to devise a transition plan, or we have to understand before that what's an actual transition plan. So most of the times people think that when we talk about a transition plan, so we are at certain emission level at X level, and then by 2030 we have to reduce by 20%, 30%. And in fact, organizations like SBTI or the organizations who are following those, so they have very much simplified this computation, and people just ask that, okay, what's your target to reduce that? And what's your target to achieve net zero, whether it's own operations or financed emission? But this is something which is not very straightforward, simple question that, okay, today we are at some 25-30 million tons of CO2 emission, and by 2055-60 we would be able to reduce that to at least by 90% of our emissions. So there is a lot of uncertainty which goes into that, and to overcome that uncertainty, what you need to do is that to understand the process which we call as scenario analysis. So you need to understand that which are the different scenarios which which you want to apply here. So for example, Ankit had talked about NGFS scenarios, and there is a lot of material, lot of models which is available in public domain. So there are different integrated assessment models like GCAM, Remind, Message, and then for macroeconomic NIGEM. So these models are available, and these models are, most of them are freely available apart from IEA scenarios. So what you can do is that you can go through those scenarios, or at least NGFS scenarios you can see, and see that for different sectors, how those sectors are going to change over a period of time under different assumptions. So what scenario does is that, so they talk about different levels. So for example, if we are able to achieve net zero by 2050, then how different sectors will we have? So for doing this transition planning, your focus has to be sector specific. Okay. So without sector specific, because each sector is unique, for each sector, there will be different decarbonization levers. There can be certain levers like renewable, which can be common across all the sectors, but there can be some sector specific decarbonization levers like electric arc furnace or there can be some levers like hydrogen, which can impact multiple sectors. So you need to understand that how these levers adoption will happen over a period of time under different assumptions. And then uh, when you are doing this planning, so you have to also understand that emission reduction is not the only target, but there are two other variables which are involved in this equation, and those are the risk and opportunity. So as a bank, what kind of risk that transition is opening for us, and what is the opportunity which is there for us. So we all have some internal benchmarks like interest coverage ratio or DSCR. So for a customer or for a sector, whenever we are going to apply any decarbonization lever, so as a result of that, what is the buildup of leverage as a result of that? Or for that customer, what kind of CapEx, OpEx is required as a bank? How much of that CapEx, OpEx financing we can do? So that understanding we need to develop. And this is a very sector specific exercise which we need to understand. And once you have developed the sector specific understanding, so then what you need to do is that to engage with your clients under those sectors, and each client, even if the sector is common. So for example, we have started UA climate dialogue and we are interacting with a lot of clients. So while interacting with clients from steel or cement, we came across clients from same sector, but they have got entire different value chain. So by value chain, what I mean here is that what kind of raw materials that they are using, what kind of processes that they are using, or what kind of technologies that they are using, what's the energy consumption within their production processes, what kind of products they are using, and then those products are getting supplied to which kind of sectors and then to which economies. And then for this entire value chain, you have to identify that what is the risk under those value chains. So for example, in our case, when we were doing some analysis, so we found that there is a customer which has got a lot of scrap as the raw material. But for them, if we apply carbon tax as a risk factor, so that will not be very useful in that case. So what we need to look at is that for availability of scrap, what kind of policy related implications which may be impacting that customer. So what's the source of scrap and how different policies may be impacting that customer. Similarly, there may be certain customers, so for him the overall emission may be very low, but when we take their the emission of the steel which they are using, so in that case the overall emission may become high. And then if they are exporting that to Europe, then in that case they may be adversely impacted because of CBAM. So that's the structure that we need to follow. So what we need to do is that take the sector. Then in that sector, we have to understand which are the different scenarios, which are the different decarbonization levers for them, what are the risks and what are the opportunities which are there, and then start discussion with that customer and try to understand their value chain, and then try to find out that how these numbers or how these factors are going to impact the customer. Next slide, please. So, I will just try to explain what we try to do here. So, basically, in this, we have used GCAM model, and for this, so in this GCAM model, we develop two scenarios, and we can create a number of scenarios. So it's not something which will be very costly. So it's a freely available tool, and everyone can use this, and you can create a number of scenarios. So the scenario which we built was that country as a whole, we are becoming developed by 2050. 2047 is the target. So and in GCAM there is a 5-year interval which we have to take, and then we are achieving 2070 as the net zero target. So we are going to achieve that. So for that, we have taken 2040 as the peaking year, and then emission will be reducing afterwards. And then for different sectors, so what we did was that we arrived at what is the production level. So for example, for steel, cement, chemical, fertilizers. So what's the production level which will be there under different scenarios for different sectors? What is the emission level for that? And then we arrived at different technologies, how that composition of different technologies will be there under different years, under different scenarios. So, for example, under steel, we have got technology related to BF, which is the predominant technology, and how over a period of time electric arc furnace adoption will happen, and then how hydrogen will be a source of decarbonization for steel, or for cement, alternate raw materials can be a source. So these factors we identified and then tried to ascertain that what is the cost of adoption of these decarbonization levers, and because of this cost of adoption of these decarbonization levers, so what is the impact on the profitability of this customer, and then whatever the remaining emission is there, so because of carbon tax under these different scenarios, so how it is going to impact the profitability of customer, and then overall how it will be impacting the PD of that customer. And then as a result of this decarbonization, so what's the kind of capex and what's the kind of opex which is required, and that we try to quantify. So I'm not sure whether it is so it's the best way to do that, but at least it has given us some certain sense of direction that how we can arrive at certain numbers, or at customer level what kind of directions can be there. And then when we discussed this with our clients, so based upon the discussion with each client, so we created a separate Excel sheet for each client, and then we arrived at arrived at the risk factor for each client depending upon the kind of value chain that they are following. So from where that risk factor is coming, and then based upon the discussion from them, we also updated that what kind of opportunity which is getting generated. So this is some crude way of doing work which we did at our end, and over a period of time we intend to refine it more and more. And the center for this kind of work is actually the kind of information which we get from your clients. So at least my sense is that you need to do this with at least your top 100, 200 clients, and arrive at client specific Excel sheets or models based upon which you will be able to understand what kind of direction that client is following in terms of risk as well as opportunity. And for that, learning would be your scenario analysis, sectoral understanding of different decarbonization levers.
Great, Deepak. So I think around the room, you don't have to tell me, you just have to say where you are at in the journey. I'm using the word journey. Okay. And I think I do get the feeling that after vast exercise was undertaken by RBI, I think a lot of you have already started and doing it in some way or the other. And please, you can invite him for lectures. You can, tell Deepak to, walk you through what is the way ahead for your bank. So he can also do that advisory service from UBI. Okay, moving on straight to the financing part of it. So some of the disclosures that I mean, RBI of course asks you to disclose on the financing opportunities, but say Basel, etc., they are focused more on risk management. But I would invite now Jatin from Stanchart to take over, please. And yes, your slide will also be equally instructive.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Neha. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. My name is Jatin. I'm based out of Singapore. I'm the director for Net Zero program. Been with the bank for more than 3 years now. Just to give a very little background, in 2021, we launched our roadmap for net zero by 2050. That includes like interim targets, methodologies, etc., etc. And then from then till now, we enhance our baseline targets, and to date have science informed targets for more than 12 high emitting sectors. So that's a lot of sectors that we're covering today. In our latest transition plan, which was recently published, we have outlined some transparent, actionable frameworks to deliver on our net zero commitments, and also builds on efforts to align on our financing activities with our net zero ambitions. Right now, today, if we were to look at the entire value chain, scope 1, scope 2, and then the defining categories of scope 3, we see that the entire value chain of the bank, we have 98% or more of all our emissions sitting in scope 3 category 15 investments. And so we're leveraging our science-informed targets to engage clients after setting targets and also develop innovative financing solutions to help the support decarbonization, right? So just give a little highlight in terms of numbers. In the past few years, we have assessed more than 4,000 corporate and investment banking clients' transition plans. And in that process, we learned that engaging clients proactively into supporting their transition helps manage our own transition risk as a bank, right? So each of the high carbon sectors, what we have done is we have assigned one sector lead within the bank. What that means also is that we have an increased level of accountability, a single point of contact to effectively co-own the whole internal validation process and the entire client lifecycle from all the way from onboarding to setting up your credit application forms, doing the assessments within those life cycles, and then proceeding with setting up the deals. And also in that process, we assess the expected finance emissions or impacts of each and every new deal for each of every high carbon sector that can bring to our sector portfolios. Now, you'll see on the slide is that what I was speaking earlier, and also what alluding to what Ankit and Deepak have been sharing so far on the attribution factors for PCAF versus how we model for emissions for different sectors, is that we were able to come up with a concept of transition priority clients or TPCs. In simple languages, we basically categorize clients based on what part of the journey of transition are they today. Have they just begun the journey, versus are they already progressing with the journey, or are they quite mature in the journey? So you'll see in this chart here, in this little graphic here, is that we do have a list of 80 to 100 TPCs in our bank, top priority transition priority clients, which we strongly believe move the needle in our finance emissions for each and every sector that we monitor today. So based on attribution factor, they'll have 3 or 4 large clients or companies in each and every sector of ours who would potentially contribute more than 50 to 60% of all the entire intensity of the portfolio. And hence, we need to work very closely with them, assess in an aspect of how credible is their own transition plan, to what level of decarbonization do they require, and also they assess the financial strength such that the overall expenditure that they have planned to decarbonize goes along with their own decarbonization journey. So if a company says, hey, we want to decarbonize by at the rate of 6 to 7% CAGR per year, but if they have not made sufficient plans for capex and opexes to be implemented for each and every year for that amount of decarbonization required, so basically there's a gap there. So we do assess that as well and give a rating inside, and make sure that we go and closely talk to those clients and see what additional support is required to push them to ensure that they are on track, and so that we can also then devise sufficient financial solutions accordingly. So we do have our own green and sustainable product framework and also a transition finance framework, which we revise frequently. And we do have eligible activities there against which we have clients to also tap on our experts within the bank for different subject matter experts, and then come up with different KPIs such that you have the eligible activities labeled as green or sustainable finance loans, and ensure that we have created impact and also track that year on year. So our targets are have got validation. So one of the first few banks out there, globally systematic important banks, who have most of our targets for different sectors externally assured or validated by a big four. It also means that a message to everyone here is that while we assess clients on their transition plans, we do also assess as per the trajectories and the decarbonization paths that we have created for each and every sector, which has also been validated externally. So you don't have gaps there when you go to assess the client's decarbonization trajectory versus yours. So basically, there's a lot of validation that goes into end-to-end in all of that process. So it's quite important that we also revisit every year that whether are we on track or not for some of our sectors. Just give a little high-level insight. We've seen, for example, in the auto sector for ours, that in some clients are slowing down the production of electric vehicles. What does it mean for us? For it also means that we have been tracking our portfolio's intensity for light motor vehicles, and also means that we will see a little increase in our intensity in the short to medium term. That also indicates that that we need to come back and to see how to steer the portfolio such that we do give provision of more lending and financing towards companies who are increasing the ratio of electric vehicle production versus internal combustion engine production, for instance. So those kind of additional levers or decarbonization levers are required within the bank, and we need support and a collaborative effort to implement that. Yeah, I'm happy to take some questions later on as well, but that's all I wanted to share for now. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Jatin. And what I hear is that there is so much you can do, and there is so much which is happening. So I think the idea of this coming together in this room was to learn from some practices. Please do engage. Now you know them. You can also talk to them directly, but also Climate Bonds is always here. Ria, over to you, since RMI has been working on some tools and frameworks. Oh, this will be my slides, but you can completely ignore them. These are they're not readable right now. This is just to show that what we were talking about in previous session. NGFS is that entity which has come out with a lot of guidance. What they have is a transition plan package. Okay, and they give you for mitigation also all the way you can set targets, and they also do it for adaptation. So while NGFS is an association or an alliance of central banks, but what they are doing is for what central banks can ask their regulated entities to do. So it is directly relevant. We have put all the sources in this slide deck. We'll be able to share this with you, so that's not a problem. Coming quickly to the next one, NGFS also asks you on financing opportunities. Climate Bonds Initiative has also brought out a document. Whatever you have heard from Deepak and Jatin, you will see that we are asking what are the kind of products that you're looking at, what are the kind of climate solutions you're looking at. We use bank borrower engagement under the heading called delivery strategy. And we think that it is an extremely important and critical part of your transition planning. And this is the disclosure. So in terms of disclosures, these are the kind of things that the good practice or the best frameworks all over the world are asking. So we are also asking, of course, Suranjali mentioned about NBFCs. So usually when you say finance mission, you think of a corporate entity, you do not think of an NBFC. And that is something that we want to include. So it is really that level. I think a lot of us will be at, whichever level we are, it'll help you to use this guidance, and there's a whole lot of detail. We also have a transition plan package for corporate entities, for banks, and how banks can categorize their borrowers at different stages. So all of this will be very useful. Ria?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ria, and I work with a think tank called Rocky Mountain Institute. We've been doing some global research exactly to address the question of how can bankers make some sense of what is seeming to be a fairly complex topic of engaging with their corporate clients. In experience, our global teams that have engaged with more than 15 international banks, they really realize that the big challenge is not so much about setting a target. It's about how do you understand that target and then what do you do about it. And a lot of that leads you to wanting to understand sector-specific insights. As Deepak ji just mentioned and Jatin also mentioned, sectors and the core decarbonization levers for each of those sectors is really the crux or the main thing that you're trying to understand as you assess different clients. And tackling this sector by sector is a strategy that we're adopting at RMI. So the framework that our team realized, and this is something I would say similar to what is already being done by some of the banks, but we realized there are three critical pillars that you as a financial institution can engage with your client on. And it really starts by firstly understanding the strategy and the ambition that has been set by your corporate client. strategy, this can at times be stated explicitly as a transition plan, or at times, the company, especially in India, may choose not to call it or label it as a transition plan because there is a certain amount of expectation or risk that comes around with it. What we see is that having a plan that the company has towards its future readiness for the next 5-year, 10-year plan, all the way to 2050 is fairly critical. And whether it's called a transition plan or not, understanding that strategy is really the first step of the process. The second sort of critical pillar is what we're calling feasibility. And I think this is, in my opinion, the most important thing to understand because when you start looking at it from a sector perspective, you start seeing whether the strategy that the company is taking is that feasible or not. And that comes down to really trying to understand the key decarbonization levers that are being adopted. What we have been trying to do is in a way called as dependency mapping. So for any lever to materialize, for instance, if a company says that to decarbonize, for instance, in the steel sector, one of the levers that we're adopting is renewable energy. And we want to install, say, 10 gigawatts by 2030, and they maybe are at less than 1 gigawatt of electricity right now. The question then really comes into place as a banker for us to investigate would be on the lines of whether it's actually feasible for the company to jump from 1 to 10 in the next 5-year timeline. What are the things that they're dependent on from a policy perspective, from a market perspective, and a technology readiness perspective? Similarly, if you see, for instance, Suranjali mentioned about CCUS as a technology. Is the technology already ready in the Indian context to give you that amount of abatement that the company assumes they will get from that technology? Is there a supportive policy environment around it? And similarly, is the market economics making sense or not for this? So we see the drivers of feasibility for each of the decarbonization levers in that sector being supremely critical to understand from a holistic lens. And at times when we've spoken to bankers about this, the feedback that we get is that we're finance people, we're not sector people. So in this sort of journey, our learning is that bankers will soon, to become distinguished from other bankers, will also have to get some lens of sectoral perspective in, and hence understanding and creating that sector desk understanding that is already so naturally there for your traditional sectors and traditional technologies in those sectors will also have to transition towards wanting to understand these new emerging technologies at the core of their feasibility. The last pillar in the framework that we've identified, which is critical, is accountability. This comes certainly from the lens of disclosures. But what we have seen is that, yes, disclosures is a very important aspect because it can hold you accountable as a corporate to what you're doing. At least in the Indian context, we've seen that a lot of companies are doing a lot more than what they're disclosing. And as a banker, you have so much more leverage over your client to ask those pointed, directed questions. So we see that being equally important as a lever of accountability to institute as a part of your strategy. Just a very short case study that I want to highlight here. Using what we did was basically the framework that you saw. We've applied that for a few global companies and tried to see how does that pan out. What we've done here is in this slide that you would see is a illustrative example that we did. We looked at third-party independent data that we got from a source called S&P Capital IQ, as well as the Global Energy Monitor. What we were trying to see is that this company had a stated, for instance, it had a stated target that they want to achieve X amount of renewable energy from these different sources by X timeline. And when we actually looked at this Global Energy Monitor data, which shows for a few sectors, not for all, for power, there is data, for cement and steel, there is data. We saw that the production plan that they had at an asset level did not necessarily match the ambition or the target that they had. There was a cancelled renewable energy project, which meant that if that is not being met by some other source of renewable energy, they will miss their target. We found that as a very interesting way for the banker to then go back and engage with that client and say, hey, you had this plan in mind. This is a stated target. But if you see your asset level production vision, it's not necessarily adding up to the vision. And we as a bank, we want to engage more deeply on climate related activities that you're doing. We want to finance those. So is there a possibility for you to find renewable energy from some other source rather than the source that's gotten cancelled? So we found this as an interesting way for bankers to not necessarily go and school their clients, but as a way to cooperatively build their investment portfolio towards green investments as well. So the approach that we're seeing, which is being successfully used by several bankers globally, and this is still something new emerging. I would say Indian banks are also in multiple ways doing this, is to use business intelligence or insights from the climate perspective that can actually help you build your portfolio ahead and out. So with that lens, I'm going to pause, but there's a lot more that we can share. And by the end of this year, in early December, we're hoping to put out a specific sort of playbook for bankers on how they can understand the steel sector in detail in the Indian context. That would be the first piece we're doing from a corporate transition assessment in the Indian context, and would love to take it up for further discussion. Back to you.
Thank you, Ria. As you know, that this is very good discussion. This is very good presentation, but discussion has been very sort of limited because of the time. Something that we are going to take back. But is there something that you want to ask any one of us right now? Otherwise, over tea, over when we break, we can move the next slide. The idea was that when you leave this room, what will be those follow-up actions that you can think of implementing or talking to any of us over here, or if there is any support, any advice that is required, then please do reach out to us. Climate Bonds works with partners to actually do a lot of workshops and deep dives with banks and corporate. So the other session in the other hall is with the corporate sector. So we do that, and we wanted to bring this all together so that you know that what is possible to do going forward. Any questions on whatever you heard?
Think there is a lot of misalignment that's been happening, especially in the UK and Europe. And one of the things that is what I'm speaking to Indian bankers around is how do we learn from those lessons? Because one of the things that we see is, and we were speaking about this as well, multiple methodologies to calculate carbon intensity. And those carbon intensity methodologies just don't come from RMI, but you've got Poseidon as well. We've got PCAF for financed emissions. Is India ready for facilitated emissions as well? Anyone heard of that? M&A, underwriting, deal making. Are we ready yet?
So we have
That's the question that needs to be asked, because the UK and Europe were clearly not ready for this. And that's why what we're seeing is withdrawal from the NZBA, Net Zero Banking Alliance, because banks are looking at their portfolio, and in reality, what they are seeing is temperature rise, real economy temperature rise, 2.5 to 3 degree in the portfolio. IPCC says that we're going to break 1.5 anyway, or more than likely we've already broken it in the next 5 years. So how do we sign up to 1.5 degree if a carbon intensity methodology for a banker? How can a banker go and say to the corporate, hey, let's do 1.5 degree together? So one of the things that the learning lessons that need to be taken from Europe and UK, United Kingdom, forget about the US, is how do we basically recalibrate now? So we can do better financed emission reporting, right? So we need to think about the geopolitical context as well. We have tariffs at the moment. Is that being factored into NGFS, into climate scenarios? No, it's not. And this is another concern that's coming from bankers as well, that these scenarios are not fit for purpose. They're more a finger in the air. So how do we refine?
Yeah, Naveen, thank you.
Yes.
So there is another.
And I hope this is insightful.
It's
Yeah.
okay. I
Yeah,
think you've spoken in the sort of a drift of the whole day.
Yes.
But I want actually Deepak to answer
Mm.
a
Yes,
question
please.
which is, It's about getting started. Right? I think that's what you say. So facilitated, I think is a part of the process. It will come somewhere, but you heard and you saw, and there are other banks also, that this exercise itself is
Yes.
quite time intensive,
It is.
expertise intensive,
Very.
time intensive. So it has taken them 2 or 3 years to come to this, or one. That's 1.5 years. And this is because there is a dedicated interest out of certain individuals.
Of course.
So it was not even the bank which asked this team to do something. RBI started them off, but
Yes.
they have gone ahead, and there are others also who are doing these things. So I think the topic over here was to not look at the macro.
Macro,
It
yeah.
is looking at the steps that each one of us is taking. Please talk and engage during the rest of the day. And I think with that, I will close the discussion right now, and I will invite you to go to the main hall because that's where the next session is. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.